Welcome to Washington Watch with Congressman Walter Jones. Each month, we take a look at the events happening in Washington, D.C. and how they affect our lives here in eastern North Carolina. And now, here's your Congressman, Walter Jones.
Welcome to the February edition of Washington Watch. Today's guest is Congressman Bob Filner, Chairman of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. Chairman Filner represents a California district which includes the southern half of San Diego. Before his election to Congress in 1992, he was a professor of history at San Diego State for 20 years. I believe that's the Aztecs. Since coming to Congress, Chairman Filner has been recognized as one of the strongest advocates for our veterans. He and his wife Jane have a son, a daughter, and one granddaughter. Chairman, I want to thank you for taking the time to be on this show, and I want to thank you for your outstanding leadership for our veterans. As you probably know, I have Camp Lejeune Marine Base in my district, Cherry Point Marine Air Station, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, and well over 60,000 retired military and veterans combined. You really have done so much since you've been chairman of the committee, and I really want to touch on some of these issues because I won't get this chance so often. But many of our veterans are very concerned, Chairman, about the debt of this nation, the deficit, the economy's in trouble, and will this impact on their veterans' benefits?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. You know, the more people understand what's going on with our veterans, the best. And all of those on the committee just love it when there's members of other committees who take an interest because we want them all informed. The work you do on the Personnel Subcommittee of the Armed Services Committee is really crucial. And, you know, you have them when they're in the active duty. And we get them when they're veterans. But you know, there's obviously a common bond there, so thank you for all your work on that committee. You know, this whole country has to worry about the deficit, no question, and particularly the health care of our veterans. Unlike Social Security, by the way, is not what we call a mandatory program. That is, it's not just set aside. I wish it was.
I do too, Bob.
Because, you know, we have to fight about it every year. The President wants something, the Congress wants something, the Republicans want something, Democrats want something, the Senate wants something, the House. We shouldn't have to go through those battles. Veterans should not be a political issue. And yet, because it's what we call discretionary funding, we have to go through the health care every year. So, but people understand, when we're at war, part of the cost of war is taking care of the veterans. And people want that to happen. So it's going to be a top priority for this President, for this Congress, for our committee. We're going to make sure that funding is there for their physical needs and their physical injuries and their mental health needs, because that's pretty. Those are pretty important too. And you know, this Congress is divided about the war.
Right.
You and I tend to be in agreement with that.
Yes, sir.
But we don't care. And I know you have taken the lead in your party, I've taken the lead in my party. I don't care where we are in the war. The young men and women that come back from that war have to get all the love, the care, the attention, the honor and dignity that we can give. And I thank you for your support for that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you for those comments. And that brings to mind, I've talked many times about this book called The $3 Trillion War, written by two economists. And in the book, they talk about over the next 20 years to 25 years to take care of the wounded from Afghanistan and Iraq that you just made reference to and their families. It could cost anywhere from $2.1 to $3 trillion. What I worry about, and I know you do because, again, you've accomplished so much since you've been chairman for our men and women in uniform and those who serve this nation. You really have, and I mean that most sincerely. Do you feel like, since that the monies for the veterans is not part of the process, that there will come a time that maybe we in the Congress can say no longer will we have to have these fights, that it is mandatory that we have the dollars for our men and women?
You know, I hope so. We're going to try something this year that President Obama supported on the campaign trail called forward funding. That is, and the first time we'll have to do 2 budgets, but then it'll always be 1 year ahead. If we do 1 year in advance, then the VA knows what it's getting. And you can't run a health care system when you don't know what you're getting. We have, by the way, as a Congress, not done our job. We've delayed that budget for the VA, sometimes 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. You can't hire, you can't plan. So forward funding would allow us to have that, even though it's not mandatory, it would be ready. And I'll tell you, that book, The $3 Trillion War, outlines something very, very important. We think of this as a small war. We've got over 1 million veterans already, by the way.
Right.
And there's an incredible number of them, incredible percentage that have either traumatic brain injury and or PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So, and this war, above all others in the history of war, has the greatest survival rate on the battlefield than any time before. If you survive a battlefield injury, there'll be a 95% chance that you will survive as a human being. But that means people who would have died in earlier wars have incredible injuries that we are going to be responsible for the rest of their lives, probably. And it's just an obligation. When people vote for the war, they've got to make sure that the warriors are taken care of. And I know, you'll be a spokesman for that. It's going to be, if the war winds down, which we both pray it will, there's more veterans, there's going to be less attention paid to them. And we're going to have to fight for those. And I know the people in your district, in Vietnam, we did not honor those warriors when they came home. And they have tremendous issues today, which are, by the way, costing us more. Half of the homeless on the street tonight are Vietnam vets. I mean, that's a tragedy that our nation should not have allowed to happen. Even worse, Walter, there have been more suicides by Vietnam vets than died in the original war. That means we did not take care of the mental issues, the mental illness that has to come out of battle that's so terrible. We have to have these young men and women treated for that and understand that it's okay to admit a mental illness, because if you don't, all of the things like whether it's in domestic violence or crimes that they may commit themselves or homelessness or suicide will come. So we got a big job to do, and you're keeping these issues alive. Yes, we worry about the battlefield, but when the kids get home, there are children, and we got to take care of them.
Mr. Chairman, that's well stated, and actually it brings a question that my staff in Greenville, North Carolina, that's where we do all of our veterans issues out of the Greenville office because it's in the district, and I'm just going to read what my staff wanted me to ask you because it ties into exactly what you said. Is it possible the VA could provide benefits despite a bad discharge if a veteran can provide evidence that the misconduct was due to PTSD?
Well, I hope so. As we understand more and more, the military services have not been that, what shall I say, helpful about trying to understand PTSD. They have encouraged, for example, misdiagnosing PTSD as a personality disorder, for example. A personality disorder begs the question of were you allowed to come into the service? But what it does is say this was a pre-existing condition and we're not responsible. So the services have not been that eager to understand PTSD. They're changing.
Right.
I live in San Diego where the Marine training goes on, and they're training their Marines to look after their comrades a little bit better now. But we have to look at all those issues. Is it a wound that should have a Purple Heart, for example?
That's right.
Is it? But certainly, if it's responsible for a bad discharge, we should be looking at that, changing our policies, and getting those people back. You mentioned Greenville, by the way. Is there still the Greenville Inn there? Did you know that there was a golf club around the Greenville Inn? Is that still exist?
Greenville, North Carolina, and there's a Greenville, South Carolina.
I'm talking about North Carolina.
Okay, I'll have to check that for you.
Be very careful because I destroyed a golfing green at that inn once, so I ran a cart over the green. Well, they don't want me back.
We'll put your name on the internet and see if anybody will respond to it. No, the point you were making, I told this story, Mr. Chairman, many times in my district. like you and other members of Congress, and most all of members of Congress, go to Bethesda and Walter Reed to visit the wounded, to say thank you. And I will never forget, about 2 years ago, Gene Taylor and I went to Walter Reed together, and this young major met us and carried us in as they do everyone else. And go in this room, and there's this young man sitting in a wheelchair, and the nurse was talking to him. And so we stepped aside until the nurse finished talking to the young man, and we introduced ourselves, and we thanked him for his service. And about the time we were getting ready to leave, the boy's mother walked in. And I never will forget, she was in her mid-40s, and she was, you know, shot because her son was paralyzed, would never walk again, and just gotten in from the hospital in Germany. And she looked at Gene and myself, and she said, we introduced ourselves, and she said, "Can you promise me that this government will take care of my 19-year-old son 40 years from now?" And Gene and I, no, it doesn't matter who responded, but one of us responded and said, "This government should take care of your son 40 years from now."
I mean, it should not be even a question.
Right.
And when we make a contract with these young people, when they volunteer now to serve, they're going to take care of us back home. When they get home, we got to take care of them.
That's right.
I mean, it's as simple as that. And I know sometimes because of the budget stuff and other politics, we're going to have to fight for that. But we're going to continue to make that fight. I know you're going to be there.
I will be there.
You know, again, not only are the injuries more severe in many cases than they have been in past wars, but the types of the injuries, these IEDs, the improvised explosive device, have caused concussions that affect almost everybody there in some way, which causes brain injuries that we don't fully understand yet, which may not be diagnosed right at first. And so we're going to have to keep an eye on all these folks who were there, because in 3 years or 5 years or even 10 years out, the manifestations of brain injury or PTSD are going to make themselves known, and we cannot make them fight for their benefits. You know,
right.
Vietnam vets, many were affected by Agent Orange. And for years we denied that had an impact, and we try to underplay it. Now we have so many rules about Agent Orange that a service person who thinks that they have cancer because of Agent Orange ends up having to fight maybe for decades. Yeah. They think VA, Veterans Administration, means Veterans Adversary. I have a bill that I hope you'll help me in.
Sure.
That says, you know, 30 years, 40 years later, let's just honor the Agent Orange claims. Say thank you for those Vietnam vets who we did not pay particular homage to when they got home. Stop their fighting to get some attention. If they were in Vietnam, and the rules, by the way, now say you had to have your boots on the ground at a certain place. I don't care if their boots were on the ground, if they were in the blue waters,
right, I understand,
offshore, or in blue skies up above, or they could have been in Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, even Guam. And the effects of Agent Orange could be on cargo that they've touched. So let's just take this frustration out of their lives and compensate them for their injuries. So I'll be trying to push that. We have a new Veterans Secretary who's understand that he was in Vietnam himself, and he understands that. I hope that we can get the suffering. They shouldn't have to suffer after they have defended our nation.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with you totally, and I promise you I will, as soon as we get through with the program, I'll look at the bill, and it sounds like something I would want to join you in. In my estimation, anyone that has been a veteran for this country, I actually had a grandfather, I won't take the time to go through this, but he was gassed at the Battle of the Oregon Forest in World War I. My father, who you knew in Congress, we never talked much about my grandfather, but I got his records. And when he came back, because of being gassed, he was never the same man. He was in pain. He hurt. And actually, before it was all said and done, at 31, he committed suicide.
At age 31?
At 31. Oh. And I, from that day forward, my daddy never talked. He wasn't trying to hide it. He just didn't know him, because he was 9 when my grandfather died. And so from that, since I don't have this experience of war, that I do think, and I feel as you feel, the passion for those that have done something that I didn't do.
Yeah. Let me tell you about what, by the way,
sure.
When my dad was in World War II, and when he came back, He had not had a college education. The GI Bill, it was a great invention in '44. He was able to get some education, but more important, he could buy a house. He bought a house in the suburbs for about $2,000 or $3,000 down.
Right.
We became part of the middle class, as 8 million other returning families did. I'm a congressman because of the GI Bill. And, you know, I know with your support last year, we passed the GI Bill for the 21st century. That is, not only does the educational benefits for the new guys returning from Afghanistan and Iraq, not only will they have the actual costs of college covered, but we have looked at the housing element, which was so important, and made getting a loan from the VA far more easier, and refinancing far more easier. So if you're a veteran in eastern North Carolina, and you've had some trouble either with a mortgage or getting financing, check out the VA. It's a new VA now. It'll cover a value of a home much higher with the cost much lower. We've reduced the refinancing cost and made the whole loan eligible. So your constituents should check out the VA if they've had some problems, and if they're veterans, because we've changed all the rules and they can benefit from it.
Well, Mr. Chairman, that's another example of you, and I know you would share the credit with others as well, but you've been so out front. And again, the way I look at this is exactly the way you look at this. This has nothing to do with politics. It's about a country who has a heart to say thank you. And as you've said so well in this interview today, that this is a long-term commitment by this country to those who are now coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq. And one of the concerns that I have, and you've already articulated on this, is that I don't think this country has any idea of the need to help our men and women with some of the mental injuries that they have received in Afghanistan and Iraq, and it will be 10, 15, 20, and 25, 30 years down the road. And again, we're just going to have to continue to fight.
And you know, Walter, in a time of a volunteer army, a much smaller percentage of families are involved in, say, a war like in Iraq. I'm not sure that's a good thing for a democracy when only a small percentage does. The rest of us are not called upon to sacrifice. But the rest of us have to understand what's happening. I mean, I wish the previous president had been out there explaining what PTSD was, explaining the kind of injuries, because they need the help of all communities when they come home, these heroes. And because people don't know what it is, they may not support it. It took, it's now just about 2 years now, there was this expose in the Washington Post around Walter Reed.
Yeah,
you know, that scandal, on the good side, helped us, in fact, spotlight the issues, because the American people thought we were taking care of our veterans. All of a sudden, you had these kids wandering around a campus without appointments, living in quarters which had rats in them, and they demanded action, which is what helped us a lot to get the kind of money that was needed. But there's a tendency with the volunteer army, as if a war recedes in memory, for us to forget.
Yeah.
And I've gone, like you have, to Memorial Day things and Veterans Day things, and what the sad part about it is the young people are not that involved.
That's true.
And we have to have them all understand what's happening. Not that they have to go out and join the military if they don't want to, but they got to understand what it is, what kind of people, what happens to them, especially what happens in combat. Combat is a very, very difficult thing, and they don't like to talk about it, as you said about your relatives, because they don't feel anybody can understand them.
That's right.
But we've got to understand what happens in combat, because it affects their brain, it affects their ability to reintegrate into our communities, and we have to help them do that. Every teacher, every police officer, every employer, every minister should understand PTSD, because it'll help them with the people that they have to minister to.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you. The time for this segment is about up. You are one of the greatest leaders to help the veterans, and I know anyone that watching this show today can see that, and I'm delighted to be part of that group to help you achieve for our veterans what they've earned and what they deserve. In about 10 seconds, Glenn Downs, my Chief of Staff, will be on the show, and we'll talk about a couple of issues that are facing the 3rd third district, excuse me, in addition to taking care of our veterans. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. I do appreciate it.
Thank you for your continued support, Walter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm now glad to have Glenn Downs, my Chief of Staff. Glenn, thank you for being on the show, this February edition of Washington Watch. And I know that we've got so many issues going on as a nation that impact on the 3rd District of North Carolina. You've been taking a lot of phone calls lately along with the other members of the staff.
Yes, sir. And the issues on the minds of the people of the 3rd District in eastern North Carolina are about what you would expect. Just to start off, we're beginning here in the 111th Congress. So you are on what committees, and what's the situation here for the 111th Congress?
Glenn, I'm on the Armed Services Committee, and I'm on 2 subcommittees, Oversight and also Personnel. And then I'm on the Financial Services Committee, which deals with banking, securities, and insurance. And I'm on 2 subcommittees there as well.
Well, those I have just brought that up just to sort of lay the predicate for what we're being asked about, because I think that both those committees will probably impact greatly some of the issues that people are interested in. And of course, you can imagine the economy, the federal government's bailout of the financial industry, and how well that has gone or not gone, what are on people's minds. And just to start off with, you've been somebody that's talked for a long time about the decline of manufacturing in this country and letting sort of the real economy go away and being replaced by almost people selling hamburgers to each other. And people sort of want to know, are we just have a lot of chickens coming home to roost now?
Glenn, I know that we've had numerous calls, because you and I have been on several conference calls where business owners were saying to you and I, where's the money? You bailed out the banks. I didn't vote for that. I want to make that clear. But they're not giving any credit out to those of us who are in business. I think, to answer your question, I think that America's in deep trouble. I wish well for Mr. Obama. I pray for him as I would if it's McCain. But the problem is that this country cannot, in my humble opinion, continue to be the policeman of the world and to take care of those in other countries until we rebuild this country ourselves.
Well, one of the things you've talked about a lot is the amount of debt going into this crisis, the amount of debt that we owe foreign countries. And now people are sort of wondering, my gosh, Congress just passed a $800 billion spending bill, and there's talk of another $800 billion spending bill, and there's not enough tax money to cover what's already been obligated. And is that going to put us even more in debt with these foreign countries? And what does that do to our international standing and our strength as an economy?
Glenn, this worries me greatly, because we already, as you just alluded to, we have a $1.2 trillion shortfall. And now we're adding to that shortfall with all these bailouts. And I think that you just get to a point, and I think maybe Mr. Obama's trying to reach out to both parties. I know he's met with the Republican leadership recently and supposed to meet with the Republican conference in the next day or two. But we're at a point that, in my humble opinion, that we have got to do a better job of being able to say to the taxpayer that if we spend this money, we're going to accomplish this. We're not doing that. All we did with the banks, the first round of TARP money was $350 billion, no checks and balances. Mr. Paulson couldn't even tell you hardly where it went, much less how they spent it. I think that the American taxpayer, the people of the 3rd District of North Carolina, they want America to get back on its feet, but they want to know that their tax money is going to be spent wisely to help America get back on its feet.
Well, that's one of the questions that your office has been asked a lot, where people want to know, their concern, I guess, would be that gosh, partly we've borrowed and spent so much money to get into this, gotten us into this situation. How is borrowing and spending even more money going to get us out of this situation? And do you have any sort of an answer that makes any sense?
I'm not sure I have an answer that makes a whole lot of sense, but my feeling is this. I don't think you can buy your way into prosperity. And that's what I think we are trying to do as a country. So my hope is we're beginning the new Congress, the 111th Congress, and my hope is that with a new president and new members of Congress in both parties, that we'll start looking more realistically at where we are and what we can accomplish. And as far as I'm concerned, we need to empower the private and the public sector and in this country and try to help it get back on its feet.
Well, on the armed services side of things, you and Mr. Filner talked about some of the big macro issues, but Eastern North Carolina has a pretty big military presence, and what can you tell people about what has happened and what's getting ready to happen in Eastern North Carolina that might be able to mitigate some of the economic troubles there?
Well, Glenn, that's a very good point, because the growth at Camp Lejeune and Cherry Point and also Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, but particularly Jacksonville, Camp Lejeune, and Cherry Point, we're going to have a tremendous expansion of the Marine Corps with their families and with businesses that will soon follow thereafter that will be in the private sector. So I really think that for Onslow County and surrounding counties, and Craven included, that we're going to see some good things happen as they increase the numbers of the Marine Corps that are going to be coming into Jacksonville, Camp Lejeune, and their families, and also to a lesser degree Cherry Point.
I know we're almost out of time, but when you have those kinds of opportunities, you also have some challenges. Are you involved in any way in trying to address those?
Glenn, we've let it be known Rich Roy, who's a Marine fellow on our staff, has been down to Jacksonville on 2 occasions, and we'll continue to go down, and we will always be there for the leadership in the counties that we represent. When we can help them, we'll be there to help them. We've got about 22 seconds, so I'm going to close. Glenn, thank you for being on the show. Thank Bob Filner for being the chairman of the Veterans Health Committee for being on the show. And let me say to those of you watching this show, please feel free to call our office in Greenville if we can be of any help, or call us here in Washington, D.C. And now I would like to close by asking God to continue to bless our men and women in uniform, their families, and ask God to continue to bless America. And thank you for watching the show, and we hope to be back in March. Thank you very much.
Thank you for taking the time to join us for Washington Watch. If you would like to contact Congressman Jones, you're welcome to write to your Greenville office at 1105C Corporate Drive, Greenville, North Carolina, 27858, or call toll-free at 1-800-351-1697. You may also contact the Washington, D.C. office at the following address: 422 Cannon House Office Building, Washington, D.C. 20515, or please call 202-225-3415.